I'm back. So we've been working together on looking at metadata issues around supporting personalized learning and really the whole infrastructure around that. So I think we've got some good presentations for you today, and we'll plan to have some time at the end for Q&A. But first, let's take a little bit of time for you to each introduce yourselves. So first, Alicia.
Yes, I'm Alicia Powers. I'm the lead data scientist at Noodle Education. Very happy to be here.
Say something about Noodle.
Well, there's so much to say about Noodle.
I know there is.
I don't want to spoil a surprise.
Okay, good. Dean.
Good morning, everyone.
Yep, you're live.
Yes, sir.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dean Hyman. I'm the general manager and COO of BrainPOP. We're an animated, fully digital curriculum product based out of New York.
And as I've already mentioned, my name is Mike. I have to remember. If I forget to move the slides, tell me. My name is Michael J., and I'm president of Educational Systemics, and we work on a number of large-scale kinds of initiatives. I came off of 13 years on the Schools Interoperability Framework Board, left after my bar mitzvah year, and have been working for the last 2 years on the Learning Resource Metadata Initiative with AEPs and a number of really, really great publishers around that process. So let's go ahead and jump in. So the first thing is just really looking at this issue around metadata and looking at learning metadata. And the question then is, there's been a lot of metadata initiatives before we've had LRMI. So how many of you, yeah, there you go. How many of you know those acronyms up there? Okay.
Test them.
Test them? Should we do a quiz? Dean, go ahead. Okay.
Put out some acronyms. Anyone?
What's the question?
Yell out an acronym that you know. Tell us what it means.
Shareable content, object, resource.
Metadata.
Yeah.
Nice.
Good.
Any other one?
Learning object metadata.
LOM, learning object metadata.
Dublin Core.
Dublin Core. There you go. Thank you, Mary.
T-shirt
Right.
to whoever said that.
QTI.
Question interoperability.
There you go. Thank you, Matt. So we know the players also, people who have been involved with this for a long time. We've had a lot of different metadata standards certainly available, and a lot of these are very, very active still. And yet there's a rationale behind why we have the emergence now of LRMI. And it really is about this kind of perfect storm of pieces coming together. And it's really about making, excuse me, web-based content easier to find and really increasing the discoverability. And it's really about these three areas. One is the new emergence of more standardized curriculum standards, centralized curriculum standards, looking at the emergence of schema.org. We're not going to spend a lot of time on schema.org, but schema.org is an initiative that was put together by the large search engines. If you look at Yahoo and Bing and Google and Yandex got together and they said, look, we have to find a better way to be able to search for metadata on sites. Of course, the big expectation was, oh, we don't need to ever label anything. We can just figure out what it is by actually just looking at the site and knowing. Well, in fact, it doesn't work always that well, as we all know from our searches. So schema.org is actually a set of metadata that can be embedded within the site and their approach to that. And the other one is looking at the emergence of technologies that really allow for resource registries, not repositories where you collect everything together, but really registries of metadata that allow us to be able to then describe instructional resources and share that in really dynamic ways. So bringing together those three different technologies and three different initiatives really makes it really the perfect storm, the perfect time for the Learning Resource Metadata Initiative that we're going to be talking about today. So why do we need a standard? So here's, think about this as kind of a recipe for something that you're going to make. We know it's good because it has bacon in it, despite my Orthodox Jewish upbringing. I love bacon. And but here's a recipe that has, we know everything that's actually in this, but we don't really know anything about the thing that we're going to be making here or about the nutrition. And really big change that's happened here in the last 15 to 20 years is really now having that nutrition information that's on the back of a package when you purchase something. It wasn't available before. You couldn't tell what was in a package. You couldn't tell what you were getting until we began to get these kind of sort of standardized way of looking at the data. So where one tells you sort of what's in it, this one tells you something about the value nutritionally. What we really need in terms of search is not just telling us what it is that we're actually going to be getting educationally, but in fact, what is the educational value that it brings to the classroom, that it brings to the learner, and what is it that it actually supports. So it's a real shift, one to the other. So moving on here, it's really about having this microdata, just like that nutritional fact, that you can then embed within your web-based resources. And I want to point out that although LRMI is a lot about web-based materials, it doesn't all have to necessarily be web-based, meaning that I certainly don't want kids learning how to dribble a basketball online, right? I mean, I think there's something about getting out there with a basketball and dribbling a basketball. So all you have to do within LRMI is just make sure that you have a way to describe that activity on the web. It doesn't have to be a web-based activity itself, so anything can actually be described using LRMI as long as it has some sort of web instantiation. So here is some standard, metadata in sort of its standard form describing your resource. This could be any number of different metadata standards that you've looked at, but again, you can see the kind of embedded data there, things like title of the resource or type of resource that it actually is. So that's pretty standard information. But, why do we need to get another standard? That, I think, is really an essential question. And it's really about, again, improving those search results. And this is actually an example of a version of Google that was out about a year ago. This is no longer available online, but they continue to sort of play and tinker with ways to do that. But if you look along I'm going to go over there. If you look along this side over here, what you'll see is we've searched for potato salad. And so this is actually a standard rite of passing if you're involved with LRMI, is the potato salad search. And so you search on potato salad and you get like 94 million potato salad recipes because you need that many, right? So how do you actually make sense out of that? Well, in fact, LRMI allows us to be able to embed information around a particular area. So there's actually a strand of LRMI that allows us to be able to describe information about recipes. And so what we have down here is the ingredients for the recipe, cooking time, it could be caloric content, it could be any number of different kinds of metadata. So I can actually go in and actually indicate I want potato salad with mayonnaise. I don't want it with potatoes. By the way, I've done that one before. There are a significant number of potato salad recipes that do not have potatoes. There actually are, by the way, potato salad recipes that have vodka in them, which is yet another form of potato. So they're all different sorts. So imagine, and Dean's going to talk a little bit more about this, imagine instead if you had educational resources and you don't so much care about the ingredients, but what you care about is what kind of learner is it really addressing? What kind of grouping of students? What is the particular need for that learner? Where are they in terms of their cognitive development versus where they need to be in terms of the curriculum? The ability to be able to do a search in an informed fashion and be able to get at that information is absolutely fundamental in changing the ability to be able to get at addressing the needs of an individual learner. And as you probably have learned here, we've been working certainly with SLC and with In Bloom now around ways that you can use these kinds of hooks to really address that. We expect other systems are going to emerge that make use of that information as well. But here's been the historic issue, is that of all of this metadata, yes, you can't read this. I can't read this. This is a whole list of what's in schema.org today. And in schema.org, there's not anything, however, there's nothing about learning. And that's the big move with LRMI, is really looking at how can we move schema.org to being about sort of generic data to really looking at education-specific kinds of data. So this is the LRMI story here. And I think I've reached the outer limits of this clicker here. Okay. So the LRMI is actually has been supported by the Gates Foundation and also by the Hewlett Foundation, but is in fact a combined effort between the Association of Educational Publishers, who works with the for-profit organizations, and Creative Commons, who are really working with a more open education resource community. And these two groups have been working very, very closely in helping move those communities forward and really representing the needs of those publishers. I'd like to use this little MoMA, Museum of Modern Art example to give you an idea about sort of what makes LRMI different from other kinds of descriptors. Well, if you go, how many of you have been to MoMA in the last year? Okay, so when you go, you probably see that there are lots of different kinds of descriptors when you go there. And one of those descriptors is this visual description, which is really kind of an odd description for somebody who's sighted. And I actually just recently joined the Bookshare advisory board, so I'm really sort of keenly aware. If you don't know about Bookshare, it's about making things accessible to people who are either blind or are sight limited. And so this visual description, when you read it, tells you the size of the picture, what kind of medium it's done in. It's sort of all this sort of basic description around it. And to a large extent, historically, that's what our metadata has given us. When you go into MARC records, for example, it doesn't tell you anything about how it gets used for learning. It doesn't talk at all about the educational value. It talks about what the book is. And that, unfortunately, is useful, but not always the most interesting part. When I go to MoMA, I'm interested in this part. I'm interested about the commentaries from the artists, the curators, and from others who have worked with that work. And to a large extent, that's what LRMI gives us access to, is the ability to understand, how is this going to be applied? How does it actually get used educationally? What is its relevance to classroom practice? I like this. Our biggest challenge here, of course, when it comes to these resources, this is Ansel Adams, and although he came from the visual arts, I think it's still very applicable to this conversation about LRMI. There's nothing worse than a sharp image of a fuzzy concept. And for those of you who actually engage in doing tagging of resources or have looked through resources, it's hard. It's hard because it has a lot to do with how am I going to use this resource, and yet you need to be specific enough. So it's this sort of more vague area, but you need to be specific enough that it's actually useful to somebody. So I think Ansel Adams, he didn't know he was talking about LRMI, but he really was. So the process actually of, let's see here, come on.
You want me to drive?
Oh, I got it here. So let's see. This is my age test. Anybody remember this commercial?
Apple?
This actually was a commercial for the Apple II GS. Okay, some of you don't remember that. You don't have to raise your hand. But the Apple II GS, the whole claim was that it's both for doing science, sort of left brain, but also about doing art, right brain activities. And that's a lot about what this whole tagging process is like. So for those of you who actually engage in doing tagging, it's about really understanding how it's going to be used, but it's also about the art of education, understanding how that educational material fits into the classroom. And so it's this both right and left brain process, and I've never seen any better use of this. If anybody has that better quality version, I'd love to have it, but it's the best I've been able to find. Can I do that over my shoulder? Yes. So I just want to get into some of the weeds. I'm not going to do this for very long at all because I want to give time to my colleagues up here to really give you some concrete examples. On this side over here are some generic schema.org properties. There are lots of them. They have nothing to do specifically with education, URL, description, image, topic, language, media type. These are all sort of generic pieces that can be used to describe anything. On this side are the attributes that are within, properties that are within the LRMI. And this is all available on the LRMI website, by the way, so you can get that, and we can also give you more detailed information. But we have, at the top, we have intended end user role, educational use, the time required to implement that in the classroom, typical age range, interactivity type, and learning resource type. Those are really specific to educational needs. And then down here we have competency-related pieces which have to do with, in the US, certainly the Common Core standards. They also can make reference to, we're working now with several groups to look at international standards. We're looking at the next generation science standards in the US. And we're working with publishers all over to take a look at those pieces. But it can also be standards in terms of how you think about looking at reading comprehension level. So if you look at Lexiles, that's another kind of standard, and that can be referenced here as well. So you have to think standards broadly, not just curriculum standards. So again, you can get all of this, so don't bother writing it down now. I'm happy to give it to you. Intended user role, we have some actually recommended vocabulary, but the nature of schema.org is that you can actually use whatever vocabulary you want. With the caveat that I've always said, the smartest person is the one who bought the second telephone, not the first one. Right? So if you're the only one using that terminology, not going to do a lot of good for other people. So there's something to be said about having some recommended vocabulary, and then we hope that the community will continue to evolve that over time. So these are intended end user roles. This is educational use. A whole list of these listed there. There's another set here, interactivity type. I personally find this incredibly lacking right now, but we want you to join the community and hopefully add to this. This has some historic aspects within Dublin Core, LOM, and again, but I think we've moved past some of that when we look at sort of the pedagogical nature of this data. Here we have media type. Again, some of these have changed and continue to evolve. Some of you have flashed from the past, CDI. There's some old stuff on there, but for those of us who are classroom teachers, we know nothing gets thrown away. So we want to make sure that everything can be referenced within the LRMI and not just the latest and greatest, because that great educational piece that's in the back room, still useful. And then we do grade ranges, this sort of discussion in the groups around what that might look like, whether it's just indicating an upper and a lower grade. We specifically stuck with grades simply because it allows us to make this an international standard. We stuck with age because it lets us have an international standard. Grade level, of course, is not agreed upon in all places. We are looking at sort of ways to do some mapping, and there may be some very interesting ways to handle that. But again, age gives you such universality. And then we have learning resource type, a whole variety of different types. Some good controversy about this that Dean and I will get into probably up here later. And then alignment type really has to do with modifying the nature of the match to the standards and whether it's a prerequisite or whether it teaches it or whether it assesses it and how that's being used. And here's where you begin to see reading level, educational subject, other kinds of pieces come into that standards alignment type here as well. So that said, I'm going to turn this over to my colleague Dean.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
All right, and this microphone's still on, right? Okay, so I was thinking and talking a little bit to the panelists here as you guys were coming in that showing up to a panel with this name at this hour at this event is where true friends show their colors. So thank you for all of those that are here, and no comment regarding those who aren't. Also, we're a good-sized group, but through tweeting and other ways of sharing, then our impact can be a little bit bigger. What I'll be talking about is why this matters to BrainPOP and how specifically we've addressed it and approached it, because we've started implementing it really based on a pre-beta. So, by show of hands, does anyone ever heard of or used BrainPOP? Oh, okay. Seems like more than half. Okay, so established 13 or 14 years ago, and the reason why I bring that up is because BrainPOP is and always has been an online resource. It's never had print or downloads or CD-ROMs and so on and so forth. So web discoverability by nature is very, very important to us. Now, in the meantime, over those 14 years that have passed, I can't think of a company in the world, much less in our world, that for which web discoverability isn't important. And one really important distinguishing aspect of LRMI relative to the rest of alphabet soup that Michael covered before is that it's really about you and your resources being found on the big search engines out there. Assuming that the standard gets adopted, it'll enable educational web folks, whether it's publishers or teachers, creators, or district as creators, to get their stuff indexed correctly and hopefully found by the people who can use it the most. We're also big fans of interoperability. We're a little bit geeky in that. We've been following some of these things for years, and our take on it, whenever someone approaches us and wants us to join some consortium or organization, our take is, you know, we really aren't very partisan here. We don't really care a lot about the standard, except the fact that it become a standard. As Michael mentioned, you know, once it's settled on as a standard, you can still improve it. So everything can become a good standard as long as everyone signs up to it. If everyone doesn't sign up to it, it isn't really a standard. It's just a standards organization or a standards idea or initiative, and there are enough of those. So I'm gonna show something for which I have to add a disclaimer. Something that's really not based on reality. It's completely kind of conjecture and our imagination of what life would look like in a post-LRMI world, by which I mean that the standard becomes defined, even more defined and refined as it is now, but most importantly, that the search engines out there adopt it, that they decide that they're actually going to implement it. So potato salad is one of those things that's always cited as an example to how to show what LRMI can do, or what schema.org does. And yet, there you go, potato salad doesn't work anymore. If it's not used, apparently it doesn't work.
It's
been
hidden.
removed.
It's hidden.
It's hidden. So everything depends really on, I think, on critical mass of people in organizations, teachers, districts, etc., and even parents in the education field wanting something like this and then standing behind it. How do I move the slides?
You're saying we could do better than the potato salad lobby?
We can do even better. Although I got to tell you, I could not think of a way to create potato salad without potatoes. One of the cool things about hanging out in these circles with, you know, with AEP and Creative Commons and Noodle and so on, is you get to talk about fascinating stuff like, do you truly understand the difference between metadata, microdata, and watch this, paradata? Paradata is when data goes off the edge, I think. And I'm not going to embarrass anyone by asking you to define the differences. But you also get to talk about things like potato salad and stuff. Okay, so that's the disclaimer. I can't emphasize enough that this is a couple of brain poppers sitting in a room and just playing around, noodling, if I may say, Alicia. And we took, I don't know how many of you saw the video that Michael, I think, and his team and the LRMI team put out, doing the same, trying to illustrate what LRMI is to the people who don't want to get it in terms of acronyms. So they invented this thing, Bingle. We forgot to put the exclamation mark at the end of it. And let's assume that the standard has been adopted and implemented by Bingle.com, which is a very, very successful search engine in the future. And Joe user decides to, or Jane user decides to do a search for probability because she wants to use some web resources, and she needs better stuff than what she has right now to teach probability. So she puts probability into the search bar and hits search. Nothing indicating that it's an educational search that she's running right now. Okay, this is tricky. Let me move there so I can see. Hello. Mic? Nope. Can we get the mic on? Okay, thank you. So here's the probability search, and you can see a web search returned 97 million results, and you know, this one happens to have called up Wikipedia, Math is Fun, Khan Academy, Math Goodies, but another almost 100 million resources. If I continue and I click on the search tools option of this search engine, this menu pops up. So first of all, there's an education category. It's right there beside shopping. I'm not sure what that means, but okay. And underneath it, you'll see these filters. And the filters for potato salad appeared as a left column. These some of the big search engines out there currently use this kind of horizontal navigation, so we use this one. And you can see where this is going. You see those little triangle drop downs. You can refine your search. In this case, I clicked on the ages, and I can either keep the search as all ages, or I can filter. In this case, we've selected 5 to 8 year olds, 8 to 10, and 10 to 12 year olds. And as I'm doing that, I can further refine by resource type. Here we've chosen lesson plan, quiz, worksheets, and videos is all that we want to see. Then the educational uses, problem solving, game, technology. Now if you're a teacher, and we haven't really asked how many of you are, some of this stuff hopefully is sounding very, very useful, right? If you're a student doing research, some of this stuff is going to be really, really useful. Not to say that these are the right categories, but as Michael said, it's a work in progress. Chime in. The community will eventually help decide what is truly useful and not outdated. And based on that, I thought I have something here that shows, well, actually I can't do that, but the 92 million resources would, of course, go down to considerably less, because it would be primarily resources that have the LRMI metadata in their web pages, and that conform to all of these filtering options that I selected. You still have to do some manual work to find the best resources, but you're in much better shape than you would be today if you were to do the same search. All right. So let me pause here for questions on these slides before handing it off to Michael again to show you what the process of tagging actually
Can you clarify,
consists
you
of.
said that the search engines have to adopt this? Is that?
So the question was whether I said that the search engines need to adopt this, and my understanding is, Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they need to decide that there's value provided by making this kind of service available to the community. So despite the fact that schema.org was started by the big search engines, they still get to decide whether they're going to actually implement and how they're going to implement that.
And that's a big if. So that's a bit of a leap of faith for us to actually go back to our taxonomy and our metadata. And as you can imagine, and BrainPOP is a very, very big resource in terms of how many different pages and assets we have to tag. But it also has a huge consequence. I did mention this before, but over 20% of the schools in the United States subscribe to BrainPOP. So this matters. Ironically, our search rankings on just a basic Google search are very, very high. So I'm not sure that this really is critical for us, but we really want this to happen for the industry. And so we're part of it.
I believe, isn't there a tagging app that's being experimented with right now? And if so, is that something that we could then use? That, would that help move this forward so that search engines would start utilizing this data?
Well, let me try to find a slide for that. Well, look at that. Okay. So I really didn't plan Robin there. So there's Agilix was actually asked by the Gates Foundation, particularly working with the predecessor to In Bloom, SLC, to design a tagging application. So it's actually an open source application. It's gone through its own trials and tribulations. I think it is, I'm not sure that it's completely out and available yet, but I know that there is a plan this next month. Tila, who works with me, is working on the rollout for that to publishers as a whole. But so let's walk through this, and I'll give you a little bit more context for that tagging application as well. Really, I couldn't have asked for better timing. So in that application, and again, it's hard to read up here, and I apologize for that. These are just screenshots taken. This is using some of BrainPOP's resources here. Which resource is this, Dean, you were saying?
BrainPOP ESL. This is our English as a Second Language curriculum.
So, here is using some of those properties that we looked at before. Here's where I have activity, and what's been selected here is hands-on and lesson plan. And so you can actually do a multiple select in this. You've actually indicated already on the far left side through a unique URL associated with that resource that it is that resource, and you've given other information about it. You can then go down and say, what kind of grouping type is it going to be used with? In this case, individuals and pairs of students, particularly working with it. Again, we can see that information becomes part of the metadata associated with it. So this is a split screen application, so you can actually view the web resource at the same time as you're tagging it. Imagine that. Really advantageous, and it really speeds the process of doing tagging. Again, we can see language, but we've also indicated, so English right there. We've indicated through the dot notation which Common Core standard it relates to, and it'll then populate the rest of the data, and also indicated that it teaches those concepts associated with that Common Core standard. We can actually do a lookup through this educational alignment. This application is the first of what we hope will be many. We're actually working with AEP around round 3 funding, which will probably be the last funding for this initial startup segment of LRMI. And we're going to be reaching out to service providers. I know Matt's here, and there are a number of organizations that provide services to publishers, and we plan to help support them in being able to provide correlation services to make use of LRMI. And also looking to companies who will provide alternative tagging tools for this as well. So the idea is to create an ecosystem around the LRMI tags, and so that there are a number of ways that either you, if you're a classroom teacher, can tag some of your own resources, or if you're a publisher, ways that you can integrate that into your existing workflow, or so that you can actually go outside of your organization and contract with somebody to actually do that tagging for you. So as somebody who used to run an organization where we had 100 people doing tagging of resources, I can tell you, I don't plan to go back into that business again. But I know there are a lot of people who do have it as part of their bread and butter, and we plan to try to make that as available to people as possible. Steve?
So standards-based tagging currently is Common Core?
Within the LRMI, yeah, within the LRMI tags, but it could be anything that has some unique identifiers.
So it could be state-based?
It could be state-based. It could be anything, but it does need to have some sort of unique identifier for that particular item that's generally agreed upon. Otherwise, there's no good way to point to that in any definitive manner. Yes.
When you tag, is there a quality control kind of thing?
Yeah.
I mean, are you agnostic, or do you list a number of things, or is something the first thing, and then that's where I'm going to that first thing?
Yeah.
And then if that first thing doesn't work for me, or my application, I
Yeah.
can go on to another thing? How does that?
Yeah, so the question had to do with quality of tagging and whether there's a quality control that happens. So first off, within the LRMI organization itself, we're just creating an enabling structure for that to take place. We do expect, for example, that organizations that today provide those services, they do some of their own internal quality control. What we're trying to urge them to do is to recognize that tagging to standards for this purpose is very different than when you do it for the purpose of creating simply a correlation report, for example, when you're doing that for the purpose of adoption. And it's one of the reasons why we selected to work with Novation, the creators of NetTrekker, is that they're actually providing tagging services right now through this initial part because they see the consumer of this data as being the classroom teacher. So we see that the tags are going to be used in an informed fashion, that it's meant to help the consumer narrow down the way that they might use it, but it's not meant to be definitive necessarily. It really depends largely on the context in which it's being used, but it gives a generic, it still assumes that there's a professional educator who's consuming this in some way and making some judgment for themselves about how they plan to apply that. Yeah, question here.
Michael, when you think about the granularization project that's going on around CCSS as well,
Yes.
is there a keyword?
Actually, if you can step up to the mic, because it's right there, then I don't have to repeat it, because I hear it's getting long.
Is the,
I'm just giving you grief.
As you look at the granularization project for Common Core,
Yes.
is there some type of keyword tagging that's happening as well, so that we don't have to go back and touch every one of those again, so that we can do some type of search that allows us to correlate that back? mean, you look at the Common Core standard, it's got 8, 10 sections, it's going to become 8 to 10 subcomponents under the STEM. How are we going to navigate that, and is that going to be up to the publishers and the content providers to go back and retag that with the granular components?
Michael, can we hire him? I like that remark.
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, to some extent, it depends on those who provide the tools. I mean, you certainly could build a tool to help you, but I would say when you're looking, so for those who aren't aware, so the Common Core standards only go down to a certain level of granularity, and you end up with these composite statements. So an example might be that, I'm making this up, top of my head, student is able to add, subtract, multiply, and divide single digit, double digit, and multiple digit numbers. So you could see how that could be broken up for an assessment purpose into at least 8 different substandards as part of that. We try not to use that term, they're not substandard. More granular standards within that piece. I caught myself in that, and I may have other people using that phrase. And so the question is, how do you actually reference that? And because those granular identifiers do not yet exist, the question is, how do I then migrate to that? So somebody could create a tool to do that, but that's not the responsibility of LRMI. And we have certainly made others aware of that issue, and I know there are people in this room who are talking about that as well. Quite honestly, when you're getting down to that level of granularity, I want somebody to touch that. I want them to look at that, because it really needs to be validated by somebody who understands the content and who's really looking at that particular piece. So there are ways it might be able to assist, but I think it needs to be done in a handheld kind of way. Does that answer? Okay, thanks. Yep, another question?
My question is, how do you avoid having just a small group of large publishers dominate this process? Right now, it seems that at least the test cases are some very few publishers who, create a broad array of information, but does that shut out smaller content-specific publishers?
Yeah, so the question had to do with how do we make sure that this isn't just a large publisher who's participating? Do you want to address that?
So Noodle Education is about education search, and that's one of the things we are absolutely trying to make sure that it's an even playing field. So because it comes down to math, I mean, it's algorithms and probabilities, if things are tagged properly, they're going to rise to the top. And so because people are looking for specific things, if things are tagged properly, they can rise to the top.
So I think there's also, and one thing that I'm not sure was clear, in the alphabet soup discussion before was LRMI, we're hoping, will become a component of the Learning Registry index and a component of SLC in Bloom, if that, when that takes off. So the work won't be lost, and my understanding is that the Learning Registry adds that level of kind of confirmation of the standards. So if someone's making claims that are very, very unsubstantiatable, then the community would somehow be able to tag it as such, or do the opposite, which is kind of sign off on. But that might have changed since I looked at it. You really have to decide in this field where your loyalties lie and stick to one or two of the initiatives, and otherwise you get spread too thin.
I'm going to take one more question, and then I do want to make sure that Alicia's got time. She spent a lot of effort. So go ahead, one quick question.
It was a question, now it's an idea based on her comment. What about the large open source LMS as part of your stage 3, where you're trying to get content providers to start using this, and that would be Moodle. Because increasingly it's looking in its latest version at repositories and having teachers, when they input something, call it Creative Commons if they want, which teachers won't do. But this they would tag. So it's Moodle, and maybe that's a good lead to Noodle.
So that's right, exactly. It's only one constant away. The question really had to do with whether look at engaging some relationship with Moodle or another more open LMS around trying to make that content available in that form and see if we can get that kind of level of adoption. To this point, we have not focused on LMS providers, largely because we figured if we can get enough of the content providers on board, there becomes a compelling business reason for them to just jump on. So when we thought about sort of the chicken and the egg, I think the chicken right now is clearly getting the publishers engaged and getting enough content out there. And if I were an LMS provider, I'd say, gosh, maybe I need to go do that. But I think that's a good idea to talk to some of the right people over there.
It takes that big publisher and makes a smaller possibility
Right.
universities that have their own content.
That's what we're in this for. We just want the field to take off. Absolutely.
So I'm going to turn this over to Alicia here, who will, I got it all set. There we go.
So I'm a data person, and it's great to be in a room with a lot of data people. Love it. And what's great about being in education right now is that we have the ability to create and consume information instantly and freely. It wasn't always that way, obviously. Walking to the library, going places, libraries closed. Information, 24 hours, totally available, and anybody can create it. And so the challenge, obviously, is that there is a lot of content out there. You're competing for people's time, you're competing for people's attention, and it's tough. There are lots of cat videos to watch, apparently. There are lots of other things you can spend your time on. And so at Noodle Education, our solution is personalized educational search. We're trying to get you what you need as soon as possible in a meaningful way. So what we do is we aggregate and curate the best information available for every educational need. And that sounds gigantic, and my job is big, and it's fun because of that. But everything from looking for K through 12 schools, colleges, graduate school, all the way to learning content, slide shares, YouTube, videos, specific games, apps. We're putting it all together and making search possible among all of those things. We build powerful matching engines that personalize recommendations so that it's a lot of content, a lot of information, but being able to pair the correct user with the correct information is our goal. So I want to introduce you to our bot. This is Noodle Education's bot, where metadata meets education search. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the inputs we work with, the process, which has to do with LRMI and why I'm so excited about it, and then what we look for as an output. So our input, and probably the most important input, is our users. We have users that are looking for all kinds of things. These are just a few use cases. Parents looking for a K-12 school, guidance counselors seeking information about college or to share information about college, teachers and students searching for learning content. Our users run the gambit, and they're also of all possible ages, backgrounds, educational experiences. So when we think of the people that we're working with and the inputs we're working with, it could be anyone. The second component we work with is data. So we partner with a lot of different organizations to provide data, and obviously we have people working on partnering with a whole host of people. One interesting partnership is the Center for Educational Reform. They collect data on charter schools, and there are not too many places you can find that data. We have data on tutoring. We get data from YouTube. A lot of information about College Prowler, college. We're really trying to get as much information in one centralized place for people's use. The third input that we work with is personalization technology, which is kind of my role. It's the math behind it. We're absolutely trying to match the right people to the right content. And so I just wanted to go through kind of three technologies that we use. One is matching people based on their profile or group. So when we don't have a lot of information about someone, we have to match on whatever we can find out about that person. A lot of times we can find out an age or that you're a parent. And if we have that level of information, then we can give you certain recommendations that might be helpful. So this goes to your intended user. If we have metadata on the intended user, we can give you a personalized recommendation. But it gets better if we can have user-driven recommendations. So if the user tells us more information, which is sometimes called filtering or faceting, where you tell us, oh, I really want a charter school in this area, or I am really interested in a religious school in this space, or I'm trying to learn algebra, but I'm in the 4th grade. All that information can help drive the recommendation closer to what you're looking for. And the last technology is collaborative-based recommendations. So if you think of Amazon, lots of people who've read this book have decided that this is a good book, or Netflix, it's the same idea, but we're bringing it to education. So as we get more information about people, we learn more about how people learn and how people search and how people make educational decisions, we can come in and bring that technology as well. So the process, once we have all these inputs, absolutely is to utilize the metadata. This is all about matching. Every piece of learning content or data needs to have some kind of information in order to match it to a user. Without that information, it gets lost. There's great content that we have on our site already, but it's hard to find because it's not either tagged properly or it's not put in a way that we can use it. So this is where LRMI comes in with understanding grade level, content area, tagging properly, standard alignment, and media type, all of these things that will help us think about how to match these things up. It also works for the content provider because, again, if we have enough information and it's specific enough, we can absolutely match the user to your particular content. I just put in a small example of what a difficult problem this is. If I ask you to kind of think of like a chair, just any kind of chair. We have lots of different people in this room. And then I give you these search results. This is my job, is to try and find your chair on the search results. It's not an easy problem. The more information I have about the chairs, the more information I have about you, the better I can match it. And I threw the throne in there because I like to think that. Again, what we're trying to do is make sure that you find what you want. We want meaningful results that make sense to you, but we also want to make sure that you can discover new things, because learning is also about discovering new things. And the other thing is being able to distinguish one thing from another. So again, you can have big players in the field. You can have small players who create great content. Ratings and specific tagging can help different things rise to the top as they're supposed to. So I have a quick video of a search on Noodle. The use case is someone who's trying to learn about IEPs. Maybe a parent who's just finding out about their child maybe has a learning disability or something like that, and they don't know about IEPs. So this is a search on Noodle where we have some results, and the person can find a video on IEPs. There are actually several resources on this, and it gives the possibility of kind of learning about it. This woman explains, it's from a channel that focuses on special ed. If that's not the right resource, we still offer other possibilities at the bottom, other things that you might like or might match with you. But one of the things we're hoping to do, and this is where LRMI is so important, is really understand the tagging. So on the left-hand side, you see the different tags. Unfortunately, autism is one of the tags that comes up a lot with IEPs. So if you did have a child with autism and you just wanted to explore and you wanted to discover, you could click autism, and as you see, we have a genetics professor that describes autism. We have people talking about vaccines and autism. Lots of different possibilities, so it allows for the exploration. Also, we do have the option of looking at age level. So in this instance, when you specify ages 1 through 6, you do get resources that specialize in teaching children with autism. One of the things that concerns me about this particular search is that there's only one content provider here listed, which I doubt I know for a fact there are other content providers that provide information for autism for this particular age level, but they're not rising to the top because they're not tagged in a way that I can easily get the search to happen. Okay? So I just wanted to give those examples and explain this is how we are using the data, and I'm in such hopes that LRMI becomes the standard because it makes my job easier, but it also makes the right content get to the right people, and that's our goal. Yes?
I'd like to get back to the issue of curation of content.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the awesome thing about LRMI is that we get to narrow down those 100 million responses, to 50,000. That's still a lot of hits.
Right.
So has any thought been given to using crowdsourcing as a way of providing another dimension of tagging that would be some sort of stand-in for curation?
Right. At Noodle, it has been discussed. Right now, okay, I'm sorry to repeat the question. I'm not so good at it. I'm not so good at that because my mind is already. You're asking if to give idea of crowdsourcing the.
To provide another dimension of meta tagging. Use crowdsourcing as some way of providing a stand-in for curation.
Yes. Providing crowdsourcing as another set of metadata. Absolutely. So we actually do this in a couple ways currently, and there's more coming. We do allow people to rate information, so that allows for metadata. And we also collect how the user uses the information. So if you're there for watching a 8-minute video and you only stay in for 2 minutes, we use that information. as far as the tagging component, it becomes very difficult because user tagging, when it's done by people who are just experiencing the content for the first time, it may not be as in-depth or done as well as someone who really knows that content. So we haven't integrated that at this point.
Michael, LRMI?
So, you know, from that perspective, so it's important to recognize sort of the box that LRMI describes, which is it's really just the collection of properties. It's not all the processes. So, in fact, somebody could create an environment that does crowdsource-based tagging that then populates LRMI information to be then distributed and used elsewhere. So LRMI itself is just the specification. It's not a process necessarily. So this organization's charter really ends before it gets to the point of creating those sets of tools, which doesn't mean that we're not engaged in that conversation, but for LRMI doesn't go to that point.
An additional point, I think, is LRMI, those tags are actually input by the publisher onto the page. So that, and I think that's paradata, the way you're describing, but I could be very, very wrong. Somebody's nodding their head. So this is a better one than data going off the edge? Okay, right. So that there are tools that will do that, I believe, or initiatives to do that, but it is. I also think it's not, even technically, it's not LRMI. It uses LRMI as a foundation.
No, Michael said that crowdsourcing is a process, not a static.
So I saw two questions, and then we'll just finish up here. Go ahead.
So, for example, if EdSurge does the crowdsource rating of a lot of content, that data can feed into whatever tagging, LRMI tagging mechanism, so it can all merge and people can get what they need in terms of crowdsource rating and basic information.
Yeah, and LRMI does not have a registry or repository or any. There is no place you can go to see the LRMI data unless it's implemented by somebody. So, for example, Learning Registry, the intention, at least, is that things in the Learning Registry are to be described by LRMI properties. And so that's where that would occur, and that would be a place to make use of that. And I know that there are other repositories that are interested in making use of it in that way.
So
there was another question.
It's in the alphabet soup, but you have to move your spoon from one area of the soup to another.
Question here.
It's not LRMI.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of different. I would think about other industries where search has helped metadata form or helped data structures form, and the most successful ones are kind of the lower hanging fruit, where it's like completely like objective data. So I mean, it's just like numbers. So travel or like an airline transport. Mm-hmm. In ones. So with education, this tagging is softer. I mean, it's open to interpretation, right? I mean, it takes a human to look and see which standard fits.
Science and art.
Right. And so I'm trying to think of like areas where that has happened in search. It's been one parallel might be like music with genres, and in that case, over time the genre use has kind of taken a back seat to paradata, so that things like Last FM recommendations are kind of ignoring that sort of softer metadata. Are there other examples of industries where softer metadata has worked?
You know, I haven't thought through that sort of softer metadata. The question was, can we learn something from other industries that might have softer kinds of data rather than hard data used for the basis of search? I haven't thought about that particularly. But I think the challenge, particularly in this discipline, in this domain, is that, if you ask 10 educators how they might organize something, you'll get 15 different answers. And I find in my 30 years in this industry, we end up being divergent rather than convergent thinkers. And so I think really trying to provide some guidance and curating and really coming up with some recommended values ends up being a helpful process as part of that. And funny enough, I used to be, in college, I actually worked at a record store, and anything that you couldn't figure out went into world music. So I'm going to finish my pieces here. Implications for LRMI quickly. One is, I like to think about, we've talked about discovery, and I like to think about this sort of the great age of discovery of large ships cruising the seas back in the sort of 1200s, 1400s, et cetera. But we all know that it wasn't just for the fun of cruising the sea with a bunch of guys, which wasn't always fun, but it was always about commerce as well. And that's sort of what drove a lot of that. And I think it's a good combination between the two. And commerce doesn't always have to be fiscal. Commerce can be about sort of all the big wins that happen through increased improved learning as well. But again, having that contextual relevance, be able to drive that, as opposed to simply who can spend more money on advertising their product. I think that's a lot about sort of how we drive and think about LRMI usage. It's also important to recognize, my father was a dermatologist, so this headline comes to me naturally. LRMI is not just for topical use. You can use it internally as well. And I do recommend that for organizations. I can't tell you the number of organizations that we work with that don't have any internal process for thinking about tagging resources or making sense out of their assets. And we're not saying that you need to use LRMI internally and externally, but if you don't have something internally, gosh, why not use the thing you're also going to use to communicate outside? And there's some really wonderful approaches to actually do that, and I'm happy to talk to you further about
Now
it.
you tell them. Where were you 14 years ago?
Well, I was telling people that then too. Where nobody's listening.
You probably were.
So I think it's important to think about LRMI as being really an important part of this shift from thinking about resources, right, where we think, okay, what am I going to use, to thinking about learning, really a learner-focused approach instead of a resource-centric approach. Looking at moving from institution to really focusing on the learner themselves. And I think increasingly we're going to see the learner is the customer, not the institution. And that doesn't mean that you won't be working with an institution, but it's largely going to focus on the ability to address the needs of a learner or a group of learners. It's also about moving from thinking about media to thinking about the nature of the engagement. That's a fundamental shift in terms of how we think about the kinds of resources we employ. It's also about moving from adopted resources to moving to discovered resources. And that's what's happening around a lot of the shift in terms of the way we look at both fiscally what's happening in school districts, but also as we look at differentiated instruction, personalized instruction. As we look at that kind of approach, it really has to do with, again, handing more of that responsibility over the learner, working with the teacher, looking at the kind of rich resources that are available to help support them in their learning. So to that end, how can you participate? There are a number of different ways you can do so. We're here for, number one, is just beginning to talk to other people about the benefits associated with LRMI and getting support for this initiative. Finding ways to integrate that into your existing processes, whether you're a classroom teacher, whether you're with a company that produces resources, produces learning management environments, and also facilitating technical resources if needed. We can certainly provide that some of that to you. We're also always happy to present to you and your teams. I can't tell you, people say, I'm calling because I've got 3 people, but would you do that? Happy to do it. Happy to talk to anybody about this kind of standards approach. Looking and reviewing feedback on metadata, we've certainly done that with the team you've seen up here and with dozens of other publishers, really working tightly in terms of mapping from existing metadata or looking at how to best describe resources, and then providing information to show the benefit to your organizations and why they should be involved. So to that end, I really want to thank, this is, Dean, not so good to work with. I've worked with Dean for years, sort of questionable, but Alicia, she's wonderful. So
I couldn't agree with you more.
there you go. I knew that. So I want to thank Alicia and Dean for a great job, and also Dave Gladney at AEP listed up there. You can contact him if you want more information about LRMI. And Tila Evans on my team also, she's committed totally to working on LRMI and supporting people in implementing that. So thank you so much for being here at this hour of the morning, and I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen.